August 17, 1944, Saipan, Northern Mariana Islands. The morning sun cast long shadows across the recently established Camp Susupe, where thousands of Japanese civilian detainees had been relocated following the American capture of the island just weeks earlier. Lieutenant Amelia Nakamura of the Women's Army Corps stood at the entrance of the compound, clipboard in hand, believing her Japanese language skills would merely help process paperwork for these defeated, hostile civilians. Little did she know that the encounters about to unfold would challenge deep-seated prejudices on all sides and reveal humanity's capacity for connection across seemingly impenetrable divides. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the untold story of how an accidental meeting between Japanese women prisoners and African-American servicemen during World War II would not only shatter lifelong propaganda for both groups, but ultimately reveal how human connection can transcend the artificial boundaries of race and nationality, even amidst history's most divisive conflict. The jeep bounced violently as it navigated the bomb-cratered road leading to Camp Susupe. Lieutenant Amelia Nakamura gripped the side panel to steady herself, her knuckles white against her olive-drab uniform. At 26, she represented a rarity in the U.S. military, a Nisei officer, American-born but of Japanese descent, now serving in the Women's Army Corps as a translator. Her assignment to Saipan came with explicit instructions: help process the unprecedented number of Japanese civilian internees while gathering any intelligence that might be useful for the ongoing Pacific campaign. "First time seeing the camp, Lieutenant?" asked Sergeant James Williams, the driver. The tall African-American soldier from the 96th Engineer Battalion kept his eyes fixed on the treacherous road ahead. "Yes," Amelia replied, surveying the sprawling compound that had materialized in the weeks since the island's capture. Row upon row of hastily constructed tents and Quonset huts stretched across the landscape, surrounded by barbed wire perimeters and guard towers. "I've been briefed on the numbers, but seeing it is different. 22,000 civilians," Williams said, shaking his head. "Never seen anything like it. Most of the fighting men died in the battle or the mass suicides at Marpy Point. These are mostly women, children, and the elderly." The statistics had been drilled into Amelia during her briefing in Pearl Harbor. The Battle of Saipan had been catastrophic for the Japanese. Of the 30 Ryuuzan Japanese troops stationed on the island, fewer than one Ryuuzan had surrendered. The civilian population, however, presented an unprecedented challenge. Unlike previous Pacific campaigns, Saipan had housed a substantial Japanese civilian settlement, many living there for decades, as the island had been under Japanese control since World War I. Now these civilians, 22 of them, represented the largest number of Japanese nationals to fall under American control since the war began. Camp Susupe had been hastily divided into 3 sections: Camp 1 for Japanese civilians, Camp 2 for Korean laborers, and Camp 3 for native Chamorros and Carolinians. The entire operation was a logistical challenge unlike anything the American military had previously encountered in the Pacific. The jeep pulled up to the administration building, a repurposed Japanese colonial structure that had somehow survived the 3-week battle for the island. Captain Robert Hendricks, the camp's executive officer, waited on the steps. "Lieutenant Nakamura, welcome to Camp Susupe," he said, offering a crisp salute. "I won't pretend we're not desperate for your language skills. We have exactly 3 qualified Japanese translators for the entire camp population, and none of them are women." Amelia returned the salute. "Happy to serve, sir." "Your timing couldn't be better," Hendricks continued, leading her inside. "We've just received orders to implement a new processing protocol for all internees, complete documentation, medical examinations, and most importantly, separation of any individuals with potential intelligence value." The administration building buzzed with activity. Military personnel from various units moved purposefully between desks laden with paperwork. Through the windows, Amelia could see the orderly lines of internees waiting to be processed, their faces expressionless under the tropical sun. "We've set up a women's processing section," Hendricks explained, pointing to a partitioned area. "Female internees are reluctant to speak with our male translators. Cultural barriers. We're hoping you can break through that." I'll do my best, sir, though I should note that my being Nisei might actually make some less likely to trust me. In Japanese eyes, I may represent a betrayal. Understood, Lieutenant, but right now you're what we've got. The women's section houses approximately 900 internees, many of whom have yet to be properly documented. He handed her a thick folder. These are the new protocols. Review them today, and you'll start processing tomorrow morning. You'll be working with a team from the 96th Engineers for Security and Logistics. The 96th, sir? Amelia asked, recalling her driver. Yes, they're one of our Negro units. Been handling much of the camp construction and now supporting operations. Good men doing critical work. Hendricks lowered his voice. Between us, Lieutenant, this arrangement solves several problems at once. The Japanese civilians are less intimidated by Negro soldiers than white troops, believing them to be of lower status in the American hierarchy. Sick thinking, but it makes for fewer incidents. And truthfully, it keeps both groups somewhat separate from the main white units, which prevents complications. Amelia nodded, understanding the unspoken realities of segregation that extended even to this remote Pacific outpost. The U.S. military, like American society itself, maintained rigid racial divisions, with African American units typically assigned to support and construction roles rather than combat. Your quarters are in the women's officer section, east side of the compound, Hendricks said, concluding the briefing. Sergeant Williams will show you there now. 0700 hours tomorrow, Lieutenant. Yes, sir. Amelia gathered her materials and followed Williams back to the jeep. As they drove across the compound, Amelia studied the camp's layout. Despite the rushed construction, there was a methodical organization to the chaos. Water distribution points, field kitchens, medical tents, and latrines had been positioned with military precision, yet the human element remained unpredictable. In one section, she observed children playing with makeshift toys while their mothers washed clothing in metal tubs. In another, elderly men sat in circles, their expressions vacant. How are they adapting? Amelia asked Williams, gesturing toward the Japanese section. Depends who you ask. He replied. The kids adjust quickest, the old folks hardest. Many still believe Emperor Hirohito will send ships to rescue them. Williams navigated around a work detail clearing debris. Most surprising thing to me is how they separate themselves. The Japanese from mainland Japan look down on the local Japanese from Saipan. The Okinawans keep to themselves. Then there's the Koreans who hate all the Japanese for obvious reasons. Hierarchies within hierarchies, Amelia murmured. Yes, ma'am, and we're learning it all by trial and error. Williams pulled up beside a small Quonset hut with a hand-painted sign reading WAC officers. Here we are, Lieutenant. You're home until further notice. Amelia climbed down from the jeep. Thank you, Sergeant. I'll see you tomorrow. 0700 sharp, Williams confirmed with a nod before driving away. The interior of the Quonset hut was Spartan but clean, with 6 cots divided by hanging sheets for privacy. Only 2 appeared occupied. Amelia claimed an empty section, stowed her gear, and settled onto the cot to review the processing protocols. The new directives were thorough, reflecting the military's evolving approach to civilian internees. Each person would be photographed, fingerprinted, and issued an identification card. Medical examinations would screen for communicable diseases. Detailed questionnaires would record personal information, education, professional background, and potential intelligence value. Special attention was to be given to anyone with technical knowledge, government connections, or military associations. One section of the protocol caught Amelia's attention. Female internees with nursing experience or medical training are to be identified for potential auxiliary roles within camp medical facilities. The door of the Quonset hut swung open, and a tall woman in a WAC uniform entered. "You must be Lieutenant Nakamura," she said with a smile. "I'm Captain Susan Montgomery, Camp Medical Coordinator. They told me you'd arrived." Amelia stood and offered a salute. "Yes, ma'am." "At ease, Lieutenant. We're informal here when it's just us women." Montgomery sat on the adjacent cot. "I wanted to brief you personally about the medical aspects of the processing. We're desperately short of trained medical personnel, and we've identified a potential solution that involves your translation skills." The directive about identifying women with nursing experience, Amelia said, indicating the open folder. Precisely. We've learned that there are several trained nurses and midwives among the internees, as well as at least 2 women with formal medical education from universities in Japan. If we can persuade them to assist in our medical facilities, it would dramatically improve care for their fellow internees. And you need me to communicate this opportunity. More than communicate, Lieutenant. We need you to convince them. There's understandable resistance to cooperation with American authorities. Many fear being seen as collaborators. Amelia nodded thoughtfully. I understand their concern. In Japanese culture, group loyalty is paramount. Standing apart even to help could be seen as betrayal. Exactly why we need someone who understands both perspectives, Montgomery said. We've arranged for you to meet with a group of these women tomorrow after your regular processing duties. They've already been identified by our initial screening, but have so far refused to assist. I'll do my best, Captain. That's all we can ask. Montgomery stood to leave. Oh, and one more thing, Lieutenant. You'll be working closely with some of the men from the 96th Engineers. They're constructing our new medical facility and will provide security for these meetings. Good men, but... She hesitated. But there have been some incidents. Nothing serious, but cultural misunderstandings. The Japanese women have never encountered Negro men before. There's curiosity, fear, and unfortunately, some of the racist attitudes we might expect given Japanese propaganda. Just something to be aware of. After Montgomery left, Amelia lay on her cot, contemplating the complexities of her assignment. As a Nisei, she had spent her life navigating between 2 worlds, never fully accepted by either. Born in San Francisco to immigrant parents, she had grown up speaking both English and Japanese, immersed in American education while maintaining Japanese traditions at home. The attack on Pearl Harbor had shattered her family's stability, while Amelia had voluntarily enlisted in the WAC, demonstrating her loyalty to America. Her parents and younger brother had been relocated to the Topaz internment camp in Utah. The irony was not lost on her. While her own family was interned on American soil, she would now help manage the internment of Japanese civilians on a captured Pacific island. The contradictions of her existence seemed to multiply with each new assignment. Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams filled with faces looking through wire fences, some Japanese, some American, all wearing expressions of confusion and loss. At precisely 0700 hours the next morning, Amelia reported to the Women's Processing Center. The facility, a converted Japanese school building, had been divided into stations for each step of the protocol. Sergeant Williams and 3 other soldiers from the 96th Engineers were already present, setting up equipment and organizing paperwork. "Morning, Lieutenant," Williams greeted her. "This here is Corporal Davis, Private Johnson, and Private First Class Cooper. They'll be assisting with security and logistics today." The 3 men nodded respectfully. Like Williams, they were tall, powerfully built men whose dark skin contrasted sharply with their khaki uniforms. Amelia noted the immaculate appearance of their uniforms and the professional way they carried themselves, despite being assigned to what many in the military would consider menial support duties. "Gentlemen," Amelia acknowledged, "I understand we'll be processing approximately 100 women today." "Yes, ma'am," Williams confirmed. "They're being brought over in groups of 20. First group should arrive any minute. We've set up as instructed: photography station, fingerprinting, medical screening and interview tables." The door opened and a white officer entered. "Lieutenant Jackson," he introduced himself curtly. "I'm overseeing security today." He barely glanced at the men from the 96th before addressing Amelia. "These internees have been relatively compliant, but maintain protocol at all times. No one is to be left alone with an internee, and all personal effects are to be thoroughly searched." "Understood, Lieutenant," Amelia replied. The first group of Japanese women arrived minutes later, escorted by 2 military policemen. They ranged in age from late teens to early 60s, dressed in a mixture of traditional Japanese clothing and Western garments, all showing signs of wear. They entered hesitantly, eyes downcast, bodies tense with apprehension. Amelia stepped forward and addressed them in Japanese, Good morning, I am Lieutenant Nakamura. Today you will complete processing according to camp regulations. This includes photographs, fingerprints, medical examination, and a personal interview. Please cooperate fully and the process will go smoothly. The women's eyes widened at hearing their native language from a woman in an American uniform. Whispers rippled through the group. Amelia caught fragments. Nisei, traitor, American spy. Ignoring the murmurs, Amelia continued in Japanese. You will proceed in an orderly fashion through each station. Your cooperation is appreciated. Then, switching to English, she instructed the processing team to begin. The women moved through the stations with quiet resignation. At the photography station, each woman stood against a white backdrop while Corporal Davis operated the camera. At fingerprinting, Private Johnson carefully rolled each woman's fingers on ink pads and then onto identification cards. The medical screening, conducted behind a privacy screen by a female army nurse with Amelia translating, checked for obvious health issues and documented any medical concerns. The personal interviews, however, proved challenging. Seated at a small table with each woman, Amelia worked through the detailed questionnaire, translating both questions and answers. Many gave only the briefest responses. Some refused to answer at all, and a few openly expressed hostility. Why do you wear that uniform? One middle-aged woman asked Amelia in Japanese, her voice bitter. Have you forgotten your ancestors? I am American, Amelia replied evenly. Born in America to Japanese parents. My loyalty is to my country. And what has your country done for your parents? The woman pressed. Are they not behind fences too? The question struck uncomfortably close to home. We are discussing your situation, not mine, Amelia said, returning to the questionnaire. Please state your previous occupation. By midday, they had processed 40 women. During a brief lunch break, Amelia observed the interactions between the Japanese women, now seated in a waiting area, and the soldiers from the 96th. The women whispered among themselves, stealing glances at the African-American men with expressions ranging from curiosity to apprehension. Sergeant Williams approached Amelia. Begging your pardon, Lieutenant, but is there a problem? The women seem unsettled by our presence. Amelia considered how to explain. It's not something they've experienced before. Sergeant, Imperial Japan is a racially homogeneous society. Most of these women have never seen a person with dark skin except in propaganda materials. Ah, Williams nodded, understanding. And I imagine that propaganda wasn't flattering. No, Amelia admitted. Japanese war propaganda portrays Americans in general as devils, but presents Negro soldiers in particularly dehumanizing ways. Williams gave a humorless chuckle. Not so different from home, then. The afternoon continued with the processing of the remaining women. As Amelia conducted interviews, she began to identify those with medical training, making notes for Captain Montgomery's request. By 1600 hours, all 100 women had been processed and returned to their section of the camp, with the exception of 7 whom Amelia had flagged for the medical personnel discussion. These 7 women now sat together in the otherwise empty processing center, their expressions wary. They ranged in age from 25 to 50, their bearing suggesting education and professional training. Sergeant Williams and Private Johnson remained for security, positioned near the door at Lieutenant Jackson's insistence before he departed. Amelia addressed the women in Japanese. Thank you for remaining. You have been identified as having medical training that could be valuable in improving conditions within the camp. One woman, who had introduced herself during processing as Keiko Watanabe, responded with unmistakable hostility. We have no obligation to assist our captors. You would not be assisting your captors, Amelia clarified. You would be helping your own people. Camp medical facilities are understaffed, and many Japanese internees, especially children and the elderly, are suffering as a result. Another woman, Fumiko Tanaka, who had identified herself as a midwife, spoke up. If we help, we will be seen as collaborators. You understand this, yes? Amelia nodded. I understand, but consider the alternative. Without adequate medical care, how many of your people will suffer unnecessarily? The women exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. The oldest, Sachiko Yamamoto, who had trained as a nurse in Tokyo, asked, "What exactly would be required of us?" "You would work in the camp hospital, under the supervision of American medical personnel, but primarily attending to Japanese patients. Your expertise would ensure that cultural sensitivities are respected and that communication barriers do not prevent proper care." As the discussion continued in Japanese, Amelia became aware of the women's periodic glances toward Williams and Johnson. Finally, Keiko Watanabe asked directly, "Why are these men here? Are they guards?" "They are soldiers assigned to this facility," Amelia explained. "Sergeant Williams and Private Johnson are with the 96th Engineer Battalion. They've been constructing much of the camp infrastructure, including the new medical facilities." This information prompted a flurry of whispered conversation among the women. Amelia caught fragments mentioning skin color and questioning whether these were indeed Americans or perhaps soldiers from some other allied nation. Deciding to address the evident curiosity directly, Amelia said, "These are African American soldiers, Black Americans. They are full American citizens and members of our military, though they serve in segregated units." Sachiko Yamamoto, the older nurse, leaned forward. "We were told that Americans keep their Negro population as slaves, that they are savages. These men do not appear to be either slaves or savages." Amelia glanced at Williams and Johnson, who stood attentively by the door, unaware of the conversation happening in Japanese. "What you were told was propaganda," she said carefully. "While there is discrimination against Negro citizens in America, slavery was abolished nearly 80 years ago. These men are volunteer soldiers serving their country, just as Japanese soldiers serve Japan." "They are very tall," observed Fumiko Tanaka, "and their uniforms are so clean and proper." Another woman, younger than the rest, added quietly, "They have kind eyes." The conversation had taken an unexpected turn, revealing a crack in the wall of propaganda that had shaped these women's understanding of the world. Amelia decided to leverage this moment of curiosity. "Would you like to ask them questions?" she offered. "I can translate." After a brief consultation among themselves, the women agreed. Amelia called Williams and Johnson over. "Sergeant, Private, these women have expressed interest in learning more about you and your unit. With your permission, I'd like to facilitate a conversation. They've never encountered African American men before, and it might help build trust for our medical initiative." Williams looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, Lieutenant, happy to oblige." With Amelia translating, the Japanese women hesitantly began asking questions. Where were the men from? Williams was from Georgia, Johnson from Illinois. What were their jobs before the war? Williams had worked in his father's carpentry business. Johnson had been attending college on an athletic scholarship. Did they have families? Both had parents, siblings, and Johnson was engaged to be married when the war ended. As the conversation progressed, Amelia observed a transformation. The Japanese women's initial tension visibly eased. Questions became more personal, more curious. When Fumiko Tanaka asked if she might touch Williams' hand to see if the color transferred, he laughed good-naturedly and extended his palm. The moment her pale fingers touched his dark skin, something shifted in the room. A barrier dissolved. "Tell them we're not so different," Williams said to Amelia. "We all want the same things. Safety for our families, a world at peace, a chance to live with dignity." When Amelia translated this, Sachiko Yamamoto nodded slowly. "Perhaps we have been misled about many things," she said in Japanese. Then, with deliberate effort, she spoke directly to Williams in halting English. "Thank you, you are a kind man." The conversation lasted nearly an hour. By its conclusion, all 7 women had agreed to assist in the camp medical facilities. As they were escorted back to their quarters, Amelia overheard Keiko Watanabe, the most hostile of the group initially, say quietly to her companions, "They are handsome, these Black Americans, not at all like we were told." The next morning, Captain Montgomery summoned Amelia to the camp administration building. "Lieutenant, I don't know how you did it," she said with genuine amazement, "but all 7 of those medical professionals reported for duty this morning. Dr. Phillips says the older nurse, Yamamoto, is already proving invaluable with pediatric cases. They're good people caught in impossible circumstances," Amelia replied. Once they understood they'd be helping their own community rather than the American war effort, the decision became easier. Well, whatever you said worked wonders. We'd like you to continue these recruiting efforts. Intelligence has identified at least 20 more women with useful skills, teachers, administrators, cooks with institutional experience. If we can integrate them into camp operations, conditions will improve dramatically for everyone. I'll do my best, Captain. But I should mention that the breakthrough yesterday came largely thanks to Sergeant Williams and Private Johnson. Their interaction with the Japanese women challenged some deep-seated misconceptions. Montgomery looked skeptical. The Negro soldiers? Really? Yes, ma'am, the women had been fed extreme propaganda about black Americans. Meeting Williams and Johnson in person contradicted everything they'd been told. It made them question what other lies they'd been told. Interesting approach, Lieutenant. Unconventional, but if it works. Montgomery shuffled through papers on her desk. We're expanding the program. Starting tomorrow, you'll work with a new group of women with potential value to camp operations. I'll make sure Williams and his men are assigned to assist. Over the next 2 weeks, Amelia repeated the process with various groups of Japanese women who possessed skills valuable to camp operations. Each time the pattern was similar: initial resistance, followed by carefully facilitated interactions with the soldiers from the 96th Engineers, leading ultimately to cooperation. The conversations revealed the extent of Japanese wartime propaganda regarding Americans, particularly African Americans, but also exposed the limited understanding the American soldiers had of Japanese society. Private Cooper, a former schoolteacher from Philadelphia, was particularly effective at connecting with the Japanese women who had been educators. Despite the language barrier, he demonstrated teaching techniques using improvised visual aids, creating moments of professional recognition that transcended cultural differences. Word spread through the women's section of Camp Susupe. What had begun as isolated interactions developed into a broader phenomenon. Japanese women who had initially hidden in their quarters at the sight of any American soldier now acknowledged the men of the 96th with cautious nods. Children who had once fled in terror began to accept candy and small toys crafted by the engineers during their off-duty hours. Sergeant Williams, recognized by his height and distinctive bearing, became something of a camp celebrity. Japanese mothers would point him out to their children with whispered explanations that Amelia occasionally overheard. "That is Sergeant Williams. He is a black American. He builds hospitals and schools. He is not a devil, as we were told." The transformation wasn't universal, of course. Many internees maintained their distance and distrust. Some of the older men, former military or government officials, openly disapproved of any fraternization. But the shift was significant enough that Captain Montgomery requested a meeting with Amelia and Captain Robert Hendricks to discuss the phenomenon. "Lieutenant Nakamura has inadvertently created a valuable psychological operation," Hendricks observed, reviewing the reports of increased cooperation throughout the camp. "By exposing the falsehood of one aspect of Japanese propaganda, she's undermined the credibility of the entire narrative these people have been fed about Americans." "It wasn't intentional, sir," Amelia said. "It developed organically from the interactions. Intentional or not, it's effective," Montgomery added. "Medical staff report that Japanese patients are now accepting treatment more readily. Sanitation efforts meet less resistance. Even food distribution has become more orderly." "We should expand the approach," Hendricks decided. "Lieutenant, I want you to organize more structured interactions, educational presentations, skills demonstrations, even recreational activities where appropriate. Let's accelerate this process of breaking down barriers." "Sir, if I may," Amelia ventured, "we should be careful not to make these men feel like exhibits. They're soldiers, not propaganda tools themselves." "Noted, Lieutenant, but they're also representatives of America. Every positive impression they make advances our objectives here." Hendricks made a note in his file. "I'll speak with their commanding officer. Given the strategic value of this development, I believe we can justify dedicating more personnel from the 96th to these community relations efforts." Following this meeting, Amelia's role evolved from translator to cultural bridge builder. Working with Sergeant Williams, She developed a program of interactions designed to humanize both sides to each other. Engineers demonstrated construction techniques to interested Japanese men. Black soldiers who had been cooks in civilian life shared American cooking methods with Japanese women, who in turn demonstrated traditional Japanese food preparation. Private Johnson, the former college student, organized impromptu English lessons that grew from a handful of curious women to classes of 30 or more. In exchange, several Japanese teachers began offering basic Japanese language instruction to interested American personnel. One particularly successful initiative involved music. Corporal Davis, who played harmonica, and two other men from the 96th who had brought guitars to the island, began evening performances outside the camp perimeter. Initially, the Japanese internees listened from a distance, but gradually moved closer. Eventually, a former music teacher among the internees brought out a shamisen she had managed to keep through the chaos of battle and captivity, creating an impromptu cross-cultural concert that drew hundreds of onlookers from both the camp population and military personnel. Not everyone approved of these developments. Lieutenant Jackson complained to Captain Hendricks about excessive fraternization and breakdown of proper military boundaries. Some white soldiers made disparaging comments about the black troops getting cozy with the enemy. Among the Japanese internees, a group of former military officers warned of American psychological manipulation and urged their countrymen to maintain isolation. Despite these objections, the program continued to expand, driven by the tangible improvements in camp conditions and the reduction in security incidents. Amelia found herself working 16-hour days, moving between translation duties, cultural orientation sessions, and troubleshooting inevitable misunderstandings. One evening, exhausted after a particularly long day, she sat alone on a supply crate outside the women's quarters, watching the sunset paint the devastated landscape in incongruously beautiful colors. Sergeant Williams approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this, Lieutenant," he said, offering her a cup. "You've been going non-stop since 0500. "Thank you, Sergeant," she accepted gratefully, warming her hands on the metal cup. "How are your men holding up? I know this assignment isn't what any of you expected when you joined the engineers." Williams smiled slightly. "No, ma'am, it certainly isn't. But I won't lie. It's been good for morale. Back home, most of these boys never got thanked for anything they did. Here they're building something people actually appreciate." He gestured toward the camp. "Those Japanese ladies bow to my men now when they walk by, smile at them, treat them like human beings." "It goes both ways," Amelia observed. For the internees, being treated with respect was equally unexpected. "Funny how it works," Williams said, sipping his coffee. "Both sides told the same lies. Japanese propaganda said Negro soldiers were cannibals and savages. American propaganda said all Japanese were fanatical, subhuman monsters. Then we meet face to face and discover we're just people." "It's not always that simple," Amelia cautioned. "The hatred runs deep on both sides. What we're seeing here is unusual, a protected space where different rules apply. Outside this camp, the war continues." "I know that, Lieutenant. My brother's with the 761st Tank Battalion in Europe. Nothing protected about what they're doing." Williams was quiet for a moment. "But maybe what happens here matters too. Maybe it's a preview of what could be after all the fighting stops." "I hope you're right, Sergeant. Permission to speak freely, Ma'am?" "Of course. You're in a unique position here. Japanese ancestry but American loyalty. Must be difficult straddling those worlds." Amelia considered the observation. Few people acknowledged the complexity of her situation so directly. "It is," she admitted. "Both sides view me with suspicion. To most Americans, I look like the enemy. To the Japanese, I'm a traitor. I've learned to live with being perpetually foreign no matter where I am. I understand something about that," Williams said. "Being told you don't belong in your own country." He looked up at the stars now appearing in the darkening sky. "My grandfather was born a slave in Georgia. My father fought in the Great War, came home to a country that didn't want to acknowledge his service. Now I'm fighting for America, while my family back home can't even eat in certain restaurants or drink from certain water fountains." "Why do you do it?" Amelia asked. "Serve a country that treats you this way?" Williams thought before answering. "Because it's my country too. because fighting for it is fighting for what it could be, not just what it is now. He smiled ruefully. Besides, the 96th has built bridges, hospitals, roads, and camps across the Pacific. That's something real, something that helps people, regardless of who gets the credit. Their conversation was interrupted by approaching footsteps. Private Cooper appeared, slightly out of breath. "Sergeant Lieutenant, sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation at the medical facility. One of the Japanese nurses, Ms. Yamamoto, her daughter's gone into labor. Complicated birth. They're asking for Lieutenant Nakamura to translate. Urgent." Amelia and Williams were on their feet immediately. "Lead the way, Private," she said, coffee forgotten. The camp hospital, recently expanded by the 96th Engineers, was a converted agricultural warehouse with improvised dividers creating treatment areas. When they arrived, they found Sachiko Yamamoto in heated discussion with an American Army doctor, their language barrier preventing effective communication despite mutual professional respect. "Lieutenant, thank God," the doctor, a Captain Miller, exclaimed upon seeing Amelia. "We have a breach presentation, and I can't make Ms. Yamamoto understand the procedure I need to perform. The mother's condition is deteriorating." Amelia immediately began translating between the doctor and the Japanese nurse. The patient, Yamamoto's 20-year-old daughter, Harumi, lay on an examination table, her face contorted in pain as another contraction seized her body. "Tell her I need to perform an external cephalic version," Miller instructed. "I'll try to turn the baby manually through the abdominal wall. If that fails, we may need a cesarean section." When Amelia translated this, Sachiko Yamamoto shook her head vigorously. "No cutting," she insisted in Japanese. "There is another way, a traditional technique. I have performed it many times. The American doctor must listen." As Amelia relayed this, Captain Miller's frustration was evident. "We don't have time for folk remedies. The baby is in distress." "Sir," Amelia interjected, "Nurse Yamamoto was senior obstetric nurse at Tokyo Women's Hospital for 15 years. I believe her experience is substantial." A tense negotiation followed, with Amelia mediating between Western and Japanese medical approaches, while Harumi's condition became increasingly critical. Finally, a compromise was reached. Yamamoto would attempt her technique with Miller observing, ready to intervene surgically if necessary. What followed was an extraordinary demonstration of traditional Japanese midwifery. With precise movements, Sachiko positioned her daughter on her side, then applied careful pressure at specific points on the abdomen, while instructing her to breathe in patterns that Amelia struggled to translate accurately. After several tense minutes, Sachiko smiled triumphantly and spoke to Amelia. "The baby has turned. Tell the American doctor he may now assist with the delivery in his way." Captain Miller, who had watched the procedure with undisguised skepticism, quickly confirmed that the baby had indeed rotated to the proper position. The delivery proceeded rapidly after that, and within 20 minutes, Harumi Yamamoto gave birth to a healthy baby girl. As the newborn's first cries filled the hospital, something remarkable happened. The barriers that had defined the camp, Japanese and American, captor and captive, black and white, seemed momentarily suspended. Medical personnel from both cultures worked side by side to care for mother and child. Soldiers who had been posted as guards became messengers, fetching supplies and spreading the news of the birth. Sergeant Williams, who had remained nearby throughout the crisis, approached Amelia as she watched Sachiko Yamamoto tenderly wrap her new granddaughter in a blanket, fashioned from American military-issued linens. "First new life in the camp," he observed quietly. "A good omen, perhaps," Amelia replied. "What will they name her?" "I'm not sure. Traditional Japanese naming often comes days after birth." Amelia hesitated, then approached Sachiko and asked in Japanese. The older woman considered for a moment, then replied with dignity, "Her name will be Yasuko. It means peaceful child." She looked directly at Williams as she added, "She was born in a place of enemies who became not enemies. Her life begins where hatred ended." When Amelia translated this, Williams stood straighter, visibly moved. "Please tell her that's the most beautiful thing I've heard since coming to this island." The birth of Yasuko Yamamoto became a turning point in the life of Camp Susupe. The story spread rapidly through both the internee population and military personnel. How Japanese and American medical techniques had combined to save mother and child. How cultural barriers had been temporarily set aside in service of new life. Captain Hendricks, recognizing the symbolic value of the event, authorized additional resources for the camp hospital and formally recognized the contributions of the Japanese medical personnel. Sachiko Yamamoto was appointed as liaison between American doctors and Japanese patients, a position that afforded her unprecedented autonomy and respect. More significantly, the successful birth catalyzed a broader change in camp dynamics. Japanese women who had previously avoided all contact with Americans now approached the hospital seeking prenatal care or treatment for their children. The men of the 96th Engineers, already viewed more positively than other American troops, found themselves welcomed as they continued their construction work throughout the camp. For Amelia, the weeks following Yasuko's birth were transformative. Her role expanded from translator to cultural ambassador, mediator, and increasingly, a symbol of what post-war reconciliation might look like. Japanese women who had initially called her traitor now sought her advice. American officers who had viewed her with suspicion now recognized her essential contribution to camp stability. One afternoon, as she observed a group of Japanese children learning English songs from Private Johnson, Captain Montgomery joined her. "Remarkable what you've accomplished here, Lieutenant," Montgomery said. "Intelligence reports indicate that cooperation levels in Camp Susupe exceed any other internment facility in the Pacific Theater." "It's not my accomplishment," Amelia demurred. "People on both sides recognize their common humanity. I just helped facilitate the conversations." "Don't underestimate your contribution," Montgomery insisted. "Your unique position, understanding both cultures, made this possible." She handed Amelia a folder. "Headquarters has taken notice. They want to expand the program to other internment camps. You're being promoted to captain and reassigned as Cultural Integration Officer for the Mariana Islands Command." Amelia opened the folder, stunned by the orders within. "This is unexpected, but well-deserved. You've created a model here that could save countless lives and resources across the Pacific." Montgomery's expression grew serious. "The war isn't over, Lieutenant. More islands, more civilians, more difficult choices lie ahead. What you've learned here could be invaluable." "And the 96th Engineers?" Amelia asked. "They've been essential to this success." "That's the other piece of good news. Based on your reports and Captain Hendricks' recommendation, the unit has been formally recognized for their contribution to civil affairs operations. Sergeant Williams is being promoted to warrant officer and will continue working with you in this expanded role." The official transition ceremony took place 2 weeks later in the central area of Camp Susupe. For the first time, Japanese internees and American military personnel gathered together not as opponents, but as a community acknowledging shared accomplishment. Captain Hendricks presided, awarding commendations to Amelia Williams, now warrant officer, and several others who had contributed to the program's success. In an unprecedented gesture, he also recognized Sachiko Yamamoto and the other Japanese medical personnel who had worked in the camp hospital. As Sachiko accepted a certificate of appreciation, her daughter Harumi stood nearby cradling baby Yasuko. The infant, now 6 weeks old, represented something unique, a life begun amid conflict but nurtured by cooperation. Following the ceremony, a celebration unfolded that defied military protocol and cultural boundaries. Japanese women served traditional foods prepared using American rations. Engineers from the 96th demonstrated American dances, while Japanese performers presented classical music and dance from their homeland. Amelia found a quiet moment with Warrant Officer Williams as they observed the unlikely scene. "Did you ever imagine this when you were building POW facilities?" she asked. Williams shook his head, smiling. "Not in a million years. Back then, all I knew about the Japanese came from propaganda. Fanatical, cruel, inhuman. That's what we were told." He nodded toward a group of Japanese women watching Corporal Davis demonstrate the jitterbug. "Look at them now, laughing, curious. Just regular folks caught in a war they didn't ask for. Same as us. The propaganda worked both ways, Amelia reminded him. These women were taught that black American soldiers were barely human, savages, cannibals, slaves, incapable of civilization. And now, Amelia smiled. Now I regularly overhear them commenting on how handsome the men of the 96th are, how kind, how skilled with their hands. Williams laughed. Turns out people can change their minds when given the chance to see with their own eyes. Some people, Amelia cautioned, this is still a minority. Outside this camp the war continues. Millions still believe the propaganda on both sides. True, Williams acknowledged, but maybe what happens here matters. Maybe it's a seed of something that could grow after the fighting stops. Before Amelia could respond, they were approached by Sachiko Yamamoto, who bowed respectfully before addressing them in her improving English. Captain Nakamura, Warrant Williams. My family thanks you, she said carefully. My daughter, my granddaughter lived because of new understanding between us. She hesitated, searching for words. Before war, I believe America evil. Japanese newspapers, radio say this, governments say this, I believe. Now I see truth more complicated. For us as well, Amelia replied in Japanese. Americans were taught to hate and fear all Japanese. Sachiko nodded. Hate easy from far away. Close we see real people. She gestured toward Williams. Black soldiers show us first. No fear, no hate, just work and kindness. Very different from what we told. Different for us too, Williams said as Amelia translated. We were told all Japanese would fight to the death. That surrender was unthinkable, that civilians would attack us with sharpened sticks rather than accept capture. Instead, we found people like you, dignified, intelligent, caring for your families in impossible circumstances. Sachiko considered this, then said something that Amelia would remember for decades afterward. War makes strangers into enemies. Peace begins when enemies become people again. As their deployment at Camp Susupe extended into months, the program that had begun as a pragmatic solution to staffing shortages evolved into something more profound. Japanese women who had once viewed black American soldiers with terror now sought their assistance with construction projects, mechanical repairs, and even personal matters. The men of the 96th Engineers, in turn, developed genuine respect for the resilience and dignity of the Japanese internees. Children became the most visible indicators of changing attitudes. Japanese children who had hidden from American soldiers now trailed after them, asking questions through improvised sign language or the bits of English they had learned. Black soldiers who had initially maintained professional distance now saved portions of their rations to share with these small shadows, fashioned toys from discarded materials, and taught games from their own childhoods. The evolution wasn't without setbacks. Incidents still occurred. Misunderstandings escalated into arguments. Cultural differences led to offense. And the fundamental reality of captivity couldn't be entirely overcome. External events periodically reopened wounds, particularly when news arrived of fierce battles on other islands, Japanese kamikaze attacks, or American bombing campaigns. Yet the foundation established in those early weeks proved remarkably resilient. The shared experience of Yasuko's birth, the daily interactions that revealed common humanity, and the leadership of figures like Amelia and Williams created a framework for reconciliation that withstood these challenges. In July 1945, almost a year after Amelia's arrival on Saipan, the war entered its final phase. News of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki reached Camp Susupe via military channels, followed days later by the announcement of Japan's surrender. For the Japanese internees, these developments provoked profound crisis. Some refused to believe the reports, denouncing them as American propaganda. Others fell into despair, certain that the destruction of their homeland was complete. A few attempted suicide, overcome by shame at Japan's defeat. In this critical period, the relationships built over the preceding months proved invaluable. Japanese women who had worked alongside Americans in the camp hospital helped explain the situation to their countrywomen. Engineers from the 96th, who had earned trust through daily interactions, became messengers of difficult truths, delivered with respect rather than triumph. Amelia, now Captain Nakamura, found herself working around the clock, moving between grief counseling, suicide prevention, and planning for the uncertain future of the internees. The question that dominated every conversation: what happens now? The answer came gradually, through a series of directives from Pacific Command. Camp Susupe would transition from an internment facility to a repatriation center. Japanese civilians would be returned to Japan as shipping became available, with priority given to the elderly, the ill, and families with young children. This news, intended as positive, introduced new complications. Many of the Japanese civilians had lived on Saipan for decades. Their homes in Japan no longer existed, their extended families were scattered or dead, and the country to which they would return was devastated by war and occupation. Some, particularly those of Korean or Okinawan descent, feared discrimination or retribution in post-war Japan. In response to these concerns, Amelia proposed an unprecedented program: voluntary extended residency for Japanese civilians who wished to remain on Saipan during the transition to American administration. Those with needed skills, medical personnel, teachers, administrators, tradespeople, would be offered temporary employment with the occupation government, providing continuity of services while facilitating gradual repatriation. To the surprise of many in command, nearly 40% of the adult internees applied for this program, including Sachiko Yamamoto and her family. When asked why, Sachiko explained simply, "Japan we knew is gone, future uncertain everywhere. Here at least we have begun to build understanding." The first repatriation ships arrived in October 1945. Amelia and Williams stood at the harbor, watching as hundreds of former internees boarded vessels bound for a homeland many barely remembered and others feared to confront. "Do you think they'll be all right?" Williams asked as families carrying meager possessions filed up the gangplanks. "I don't know," Amelia admitted. "Japan is in chaos, food shortages, destroyed cities, occupation forces. Everything they've known has changed." "Like everything here," Williams observed. "War transforms landscapes, governments, borders, but its most profound changes are in how people see each other." He gestured toward the dock, where Japanese women were saying tearful goodbyes to American personnel who had once been their captors. "That's not something any of us expected." "No," Amelia agreed. "It wasn't in any military manual." As the ships departed, Amelia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From isolated translator to cultural bridge builder, from lieutenant to captain, from outsider in two worlds to someone who had helped create a third space where connection became possible. She thought of her parents, still in the Topaz internment camp in Utah, waiting for their own uncertain future in post-war America. Would they find Americans willing to see beyond propaganda and fear? Would they encounter their own Sergeant Williams, offering coffee and conversation across divides of suspicion? In December 1945, as the occupation of Japan stabilized and the American military presence on Saipan transitioned from combat operations to administration, Amelia received new orders. She would be transferred to Tokyo, where her language skills and experience with civilian affairs would support the occupation government. Before departing, she paid a final visit to the section of Camp Susupe that had been converted to civilian housing for Japanese residents remaining on the island. Sachiko Yamamoto welcomed her into the simple structure that now served as home for 3 generations of her family. Baby Yasuko, now nearly 18 months old, toddled around the room, babbling a mixture of Japanese and English phrases picked up from her multicultural environment. Born into captivity, she was now growing up in a world transformed, a child of neither victory nor defeat, but of the tentative peace emerging from the ashes of conflict. "She will remember nothing of the war," Sachiko said, watching her granddaughter with a mixture of sadness and hope. "For her, Americans will never be only enemies. Black men will never be devils from propaganda. Her world begins after these lies ended." "What will you tell her when she's older?" Amelia asked. Sachiko considered the question carefully. "Truth is always complicated. I will tell her that in darkest time people can still choose to see each other clearly, that enemies can become not enemies when they look beyond what they are told to what they see with own eyes." She smiled as Yasuko attempted to stack wooden blocks given to her by Corporal Davis. And I will tell her about black American soldiers who showed kindness when they had no reason to do so, who were handsome and strong and human, not monsters from Emperor's radio. The next day, at the airfield constructed by the 96th Engineers, Amelia prepared to board the transport plane that would take her first to Guam and then onward to Japan. Warrant Officer Williams had come to see her off, along with several men from his unit and a small delegation of Japanese residents, including Sachiko Yamamoto. "Tokyo will be different," Williams warned as they waited for boarding. "The dynamics there, occupation, defeat, the Emperor's surrender, it's not like what we built here." "I know," Amelia said. "But maybe some lessons will translate. Maybe what we learned on Saipan about seeing beyond propaganda has value elsewhere." "Write if you can," Williams said. "Let us know if you find others willing to look past what they've been told to what's actually there." "I will," Amelia promised. "And you? What's next for the 96th? "Rebuilding," Williams replied. "Roads, bridges, schools, hospitals, the physical structures of peace, not as dramatic as war, but more lasting, I hope." As the boarding call came, Sachiko approached Amelia with a small package wrapped in cloth. "For your journey," she explained. "Traditional good luck charm for travelers. And this," she handed Amelia a folded paper. "Letter for my sister in Yokohama if you find her." Amelia accepted both gifts with appropriate ceremony. "I will search for her," she promised. Final goodbyes were exchanged, formal military salutes alongside traditional Japanese bows, creating a hybrid protocol that symbolized their shared experience. As Amelia boarded the aircraft, she carried with her not just orders for a new assignment, but the knowledge that human connection could transcend the artificial boundaries of propaganda, race, and nationality. A lesson learned in the unlikely crucible of Camp Susupe. As the plane gained altitude, Amelia looked down at the island that had changed her understanding of her dual heritage and humanity's capacity for both division and reconciliation. Saipan's landscape still bore the scars of battle, bomb craters, burned forests, ruined buildings, but amid the devastation, new structures were rising. The work of the 96th Engineers was visible even from this height, straight roads cutting across the terrain, the neat geometry of reconstructed villages, the circular outline of water purification systems. She thought of Yasuko Yamamoto, born in captivity, but now taking her first steps in a world where boundaries were being redrawn, not just on maps but in human hearts. The child would grow up neither fully Japanese nor American, neither entirely of the old world nor the new, much like Amelia herself. Perhaps that was the most profound legacy of their time on Saipan. Not the buildings constructed or even the lives saved, but the recognition that humanity's future lay not in the purity of separation, but in the messy, complicated, infinitely rich potential of connection across difference. In her pocket, Amelia carried a photograph taken the day before. Warrant Officer Williams holding baby Yasuko, while Sachiko looked on with an expression of serene pride. On the back, Williams had written a simple message. "Remember Saipan. Remember what became possible when we chose to see each other." She would carry that reminder to Tokyo and beyond, into the uncertain landscape of post-war reconstruction. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she now knew with certainty that propaganda's power could be broken, that fear could give way to recognition, and that even in the aftermath of history's most devastating conflict, human beings could choose to begin again. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.